I'm Hartwig Fischer, Director of the British Museum, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's Era of Reclamation talk. I invited Bonnie Greer to curate a project, and together we identify reclamation as a prevalent theme of our era. This is also an opportunity to listen and to learn as we move towards the great transformation of the British Museum.
Much of my academic work looks at this issue of the relationship between fashion, culture and race, which I think between us all will start to unpack. I want to bring the Afrocomb to the table as my kind of opening gambit. It's the thing that I think connects all of us in the African diaspora globally, and you'll find these wherever we've set up home. And the ones on the screen actually belong to a friend, and he used them to comb his little girl's hair when they were kids. But it's such a timeless design, and they're handmade. And I think about the hands that made them. The idea that we emerge from the ship with old world knowledge and a will to adorn. And I think for me, that's what the Afrocomb symbolizes. And in thinking about the Afrocomb and thinking about this idea of fashion as resistance and power, I did find myself thinking about what people in the streets were wearing over the summer. For example, the young people that left their homes and took themselves out and actually marched. And I feel when you look at these images, what they're actually wearing is dignity. They're wearing dignity, they're wearing pride in blackness. And I think for me, what this comes down to when we think about fashion in this context, it's about a reclamation of personhood. And that's what I think is at play. One of the styles that's been really prevalent, certainly in part of London that I live, is the rediscovery of these styles. I mean, in the Caribbean, we used to call them Chinese bumps. They're probably called other things elsewhere, but these little twists that women would wear. And often our mom would put our hair into this sort of style during the summer holiday. So it wasn't necessarily a style that you would wear out on the street, but the reclamation of something that is so traditional, revisiting it, and then it becomes a symbol of power. And I think it's kind of tied to the Black Power movement, for example, this idea of black is beautiful, the natural is beautiful. This really inspired me, the sort of sea of slogan t-shirts when you start to look back at documentary photographs. And for me, it's a reminder of the commemorative textiles that we, for example, at the V&A have in our archives. And I love this wonderful piece, which when we spoke earlier in the week, I mentioned it, freedom in my hand I bring. And I think that this whole idea of fashion, resistance and power, if we're wily about the way that we use fashion, if we're wily about trying to reflect something of our inner selves, it's almost as though those garments and those accessories are saying, freedom in my hand I bring. And so then if you look at what people were wearing, this idea of almost a uniform of resistance. So you can see there, it's sportswear, it's do-rags, it's baseball caps, it's a camouflage suit. And then the next slide, this idea is not new. I love this image of the three men in their suits. Back in the day, the wearing of a suit on a street, either in London or in any city where we're not really meant to be, in inverted commas, was a uniform of resistance. So the suit was the armor with which men went out into battle to fight against society's stereotypes that might have said, well, you know, as Black people, we cannot be beautiful. As Black men, you cannot be elegant. You cannot represent yourself as gentlemen. And that's exactly what these men are doing here. Resistance and power, but through everyday dress, through the suit. I wanted to draw on the work of 2 or 3 contemporary designers who I think do this thing of going back to the past, old world knowledge, if you like, and bring it to the fore in a new way for a contemporary fashion statement about pride in being Black, about dignity, about self-respect. And I absolutely loved this collection by Tolu Coker. who I was fortunate enough to speak with on email in the week. And I knew that she was referencing the Black Panther iconography, you know, the beret, the dark sunglasses, the leather, the fist, if you like, which we saw on banners and posters through the summer. But what I didn't know was that Tolu's, it's referencing her father. So there's personal history here as well as community history, and such a fabulously elegant collection that she created from that. I think that what these people, what all of these young people are saying, they're saying to society, I am human. And often we're saying this to a society that almost does its utmost to tell us that we're not. And they're doing this artfully, I think, through the medium of fashion. And that's really transcendent. And that's exciting. This idea of showing something of who we know we are on the inside, showing that on the outside through clothing.
So the series that I wanted to talk about is about the matric dance, which is the equivalent of the prom dance in America, except in the places where I shot in South Africa, which is townships, informal settlements, and partially formal settlements. It means so much. It's the night of these girls' lives, and up till now, and for many, it's seen as being the night of their lives forever, because there's very little hope in some of these places. This is Abigail. She chose to take her Louis Vuitton handbag to the dance, and she held it for the whole dance. And she comes from an area where if you put the name of the area on a job application, she doesn't believe that she's going to even get seen. So this was her chance to feel empowered and have a taste of the life that she sees in the magazines. And I think her face says it all. And then there's Lungi. So she based her outfit on a soap opera star, a very strong woman in South Africa who stood up for herself. And I think you can see that in the way she holds herself. And what I love about Lungi is she's got this fabric around her waist, like a cummerbund, and it's called shwe shwe fabric, and it's very traditional Eastern Cape fabric. Candice. So Candice dressed like a princess, like Cinderella in Pink. She'd never worn a dress before, so she hired this dress, and then she insisted on getting hoops for it, and she held it up like a fairy tale princess because she could be a girl for that night, and she put glitter on, and it took her 8 hours to do her hair. And I love to show you as well Linda, because Linda had a teenage pregnancy and it was hard enough anyway where she lived getting through school and with her single mother, and then she managed to go through the pregnancy, study for her exams and pass her exams with her tiny baby living in that shack behind her. And actually the brilliant thing about this photo is she's standing on the foundations of her new home.
I knew you were going to say that. This is great.
And she's wearing her Rihanna dress, and you know, she's looking beautiful and elegant and successful, and she's done it.
I'm a fashion model, author, and broadcaster. And it was at an early age that I discovered that fashion is power. Fashion is not only power, but it is in fact political, particularly when it comes to Afro-Caribbean people. And I learned that around about the age of 15, and it really took me by surprise. I had been signed to a top model agency, and I had gone in full of hope and excitement, and I was told by my booker that I would have to relax my hair, and I'd have to make my hair essentially straight, or that I would have to start wearing a weave. And for me, I didn't quite understand why that was so important. Neither did I comprehend the significance of it and that it was central to my success at that time within the industry. But I knew that I didn't want to do it. It wasn't for any particular reason. It's just something that I hadn't been exposed to before, coming from a small city of Edinburgh in Scotland. So I chose not to. And unfortunately, that led to me being dropped from that agency. So at that age, I learned that my appearance was loaded and was powerful and was seen as political. Clothing has always been used, I think, particularly within the Afro-Caribbean community, as a way to tell a story and to communicate and to voice the issues within our society, and indeed of rebellion. So we have the rebellion that Christine described. We also have the rappers in the 80s and 90s using fake fashion brands to kind of rebel against the organized fashion industry, which is so fascinating if you look at our journey. So for me, I learned quite early on that fashion is powerful and it has the capacity to move and change things.
How do you encompass all of these different sort of strands? Because it is an ocean of activity. How do you encompass it in a collection?
So I think that much of what I'll be doing will be obviously seen through my eyes and curated through my eye. But what I bring to this role is a leaning on this idea of conversation. So I accept and I know and I acknowledge the fact that expertise can take many forms in exactly the same way that activism can take many forms, actually. So experts might be people on the ground, the wearers of a garment, the young women in Araminta's photographs. Experts might be the makers of these pieces, the creative practitioners, and they also might be the researchers. So I'm keen to begin having conversations with all of these different experts, knowing that knowledge and expertise resides beyond the walls of museums. And for me, it's about, yes, using my eye to select, my eye to edit, but to have conversations that inform and shape that. But then once we start to acquire these pieces, it's about opening up the archives for many voices to interpret. So this idea of conversation feels very important in terms of the way I work, and then also in the way that the archives will function. And for me, my hope is that Black people especially will come to the V&A and know that it's theirs, it belongs to them, it belongs to everyone.
400 years of history is not a long time, it's yesterday. And we hold within us, all of us, memory, because it's passed down to us. The memory of not being able to wear what we want to wear, of being able to be told our names, of being put into uniforms, or being in public places where your clothes are taken off of you, or whatever. And those are still in us. It's passed down through our ancestors, is in us. And so there's always the defiance of those things. And one last thing I want to say is, when I came to this country in '86, I was very lonely for a while, because one thing, I was not I'm not African Caribbean. So this stuff I just didn't know. And people would look at me and start talking to me, and I couldn't respond because I didn't know what to say. I would go to the Brixton Market and get my food, and they all start laughing at me. And, I was thinking, I was just shaken by the whole thing. And then one day I was in the tube, I was just going through the tube, and there was a big poster of Naomi Campbell. I will never forget it. And I think it was at the end of the 80s. And I looked at this Black girl, and I had never seen anybody like her before. She wasn't glamorous or anything. They shot her like, to me, she looked like who she was. And I know it was a fashion shoot, and I know she was advertising a product, and I know all of that. But what it did for me at that moment was make me feel I could live in this country, to see her, because I had never seen anything like that before. And that's what it is too, is we are at the same time, and this reclamation curation is an investigation. So Harvig and I are saying these things in an investigative, questioning way. We somehow survive and thrive in these junctures that are not that long ago, and we find our personhood in them, even as we're being commercialized still. And we try as hard as we can to grab some of the commercialization, but we'll never have the whole thing, because that's not the way it is. So that's a kind of genius too, that we find a way to stay up on our feet. We find a way to express ourselves, our artistry, our being, in the midst of still this commercialization, still this mercantilism, still this division, still this abuse in many ways. We still find a way to have this genius that I think is what we mean when we say shoreline thinking. You come off that boat and you figure, right, I'm going to make it here. I'm going to survive this. I'm going to survive this. I'm going to find a strategy and I'm going to survive this. And not only am I going to survive, as Tollywood Theater's got a piece that's going now called Black Joy, we're going to have some joy in it too.